Well, good evening. Great to see you, and we're joined this evening to talk about Maple Ridge by two extraordinary women who are our BC Liberal candidates in Maple Ridge and the west side of Maple Ridge from 224th Street to the Pitt River Bridge. The candidate is Cheryl Ashley, who's well known in the community, and from 224th Street east to the Mission border, we're joined by Chelsea
Meatus. I know, it's a
I always
challenge.
want to say Meatus,
Yeah.
and I've got to be corrected every time. So we'll be going through a number of issues and questions that are very pertinent in Maple Ridge. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see the slido.com connectors to bring in your questions. Please go to slido.com, and that'll provide you with a way to participate in tonight's Facebook Live. That's the goal, is to get your questions. And it's been an interesting day. It turns out that John Horgan was in Maple Ridge earlier today, avoiding questions and trying to dodge around the issues related to homelessness and addictions and crime in Maple Ridge, and trying to divert the conversation onto childcare, where again he's got a lot to answer for. So we had a press conference with Chelsea and Cheryl about an hour later and pointed out the things that John Horgan had left out. So we'll be covering a lot of that this evening too. So I think we'll just jump right into it. And what we should do is get Cheryl and Chelsea to give us a little bit of an introduction about who they are and where they came from and why they decided to run an election under the BC Liberal banner. So let's start with you, Cheryl.
Okay. Yeah, a little bit about myself. So moved to Maple Ridge in about 1995, really invested right away in both Maple Ridge and Pitt Meadows. Because really when you live out there, you just know how interconnected the two communities are. I had a lot of friends in Pitt Meadows that encouraged me to move out to the area. Raised my family, 3 kids there, now have 2 grandchildren. Been married close to 40 years to Dean. Have a lovely home in Maple Ridge that we're just so proud of. And I think my involvement in the community starting right away from early days, coaching t-ball, getting involved in my kids' school, moving into volunteering in the community and getting invested in the decisions that were being made in my community drew me into politics, spent some time on school board, over to Maple Ridge Council, lots of volunteering in the community, and I just naturally gravitated to this environment because I just really love the potential in Maple Ridge and Pitt Meadows. I think we're on the cusp of just being just one of those really destination communities, and I want to be part of the changes that will really make them both great. So that's why I landed here. I'm just really invested in both communities.
And what brought you to the BC Liberal campaign?
I've always definitely, I'd have to say in my younger years, I sort of floated around parties, trying to figure out like where I belong and who it was that I wanted to be in a political sort of ideology. And I always go back to my roots where my parents raised us to always stand on our own 2 feet, even though we were very, low-income family in East Vancouver. My mom just taught us hard work, pay your own way, make sure that you build something that you can depend on in your own family unit. And I just really feel that the BC Liberals bring that to me, that I can really feel like to help people establish themselves as a family unit and do good for their family and feel good about how they themselves are moving themselves forward is a really, to me, it's the right dynamic for growth in this province. And the BC Liberals really resonated with me with that. And then plus with the building out more so, which I really love the language that you're using and how you're building out our platform around the environment, which is very, very true and dear to my heart. I just really feel that the BC Liberals have that full package that my values attach to.
That's great. Yeah. Now, Chelsea, why don't you give us a bit of your background and maybe tell us why you decided to jump into the election business?
Sure. So actually, I moved to the community. I didn't actually realize it was right around when you moved to the community as well. And I initially moved to Maple Ridge because it was an affordable place to raise a family, but I ended up falling in love with the community. And my favorite thing about Maple Ridge and Mission is that we do have a really authentic sense of community where people come out and they volunteer. We have an enormous amount of special events, and I was drawn into that connection to community. And I really started in the nonprofit space, working for Adopt a Block, which was volunteers getting together to clean up garbage. And I was able to transfer that program, which isn't really appealing to some, to something that was really fun and attracted youth. And that started getting me more engaged with kids From there, I moved into a role where I started working with youth and developing their leadership skills. And once you get involved in volunteering, you get out a lot more out of volunteering than you ever give. And that is a piece of the 25 years of engagement that I've brought to this community. And from there, I transitioned into local government. I'm a first-term counselor. It's been a huge learning experience, but what it's done is really given me a sense of understanding of what our citizens are looking for. And definitely what appealed for me to run for provincial office was the vast amount of work we were doing as a city council, and we weren't able to progress that work because we just didn't have the same values that aligned with our provincial leaders. And I felt that in times of challenge, you need leadership to step up, and I felt it was a good time for me to run provincially, and with the support of friends and family and the citizens, I'm really excited to be here.
Great. So it's great to be here with two very dynamic women who have decided to put their name forward to run for public office for all the right reasons. And I think the interesting thing that I found about Maple Ridge is figuring out just how big it is, about 82,000 people in the city of Maple Ridge, and another 18,000 or so in Pitt Meadows. So you're talking about 100,000 people on the north shore of the Fraser. It's heavily residential. Most of the people in Maple Ridge actually work elsewhere, and the business community there is relatively small for the size of the population. So it seems what happens is that people are looking for an orderly, sensible, affordable way of life where they can bring up their kids and live in peace and harmony and just get on with their lives quietly. And more recently, that's been disrupted for a few reasons. And for better or worse, the reason that swung the 2018 municipal election and the reason that Maple Ridge has been in the news probably more than it should be has been the very slow progress around the issue of homelessness and addictions. And of course, this is not something that Maple Ridge wants its reputation built on. Maple Ridge wants a reputation as a calm, desirable, reasonable place where you can live a very happy life and raise your family and be content. That's the goal, but it seems to have been quite heavily disrupted in recent years by a lot of homelessness in the downtown core. And certainly in my many, many visits to Maple Ridge, the small business community around there has expressed themselves to be basically under siege. They're facing constant theft, threats, disorder because of this ongoing problem. And unfortunately, we all know that homelessness, whether it's in Maple Ridge or elsewhere, has an overlap with addictions, although it's not complete, and a further overlap with criminal issues. And so we can't bundle these unfortunate people all into one package and say there's a one-stop answer, a single solution to all of this. And sadly, I think we've seen the NDP trying to portray it that way, that all we need to do is put a roof over people's heads and everything will be fine. You can just go about your business and don't cause trouble, or you're a condescending, difficult person. And the Maple Ridge municipal election 2018 basically sent the message to the NDP that the people of Maple Ridge have had enough. They're tired of being talked down to. They're tired of having things dropped on them. They're tired of being completely ignored with no consultation at all as this NDP master plan unrolled. So the situation has improved somewhat, but there's still a lot of uncertainty around this in Maple Ridge, and as far as I can tell, it's still the very prominent issue. We would rather talk about daycare. We'd rather talk about encouraging small business. We'd rather talk about getting through COVID with an economy that's thriving, with people having jobs. But instead, it keeps coming back to this issue of homelessness and the related addictions issues and the related crime issues. So Chelsea, why don't we start with you, having been on council now for 2+ years. Tell us about your experience with how the NDP were dealing with the homelessness issue and whether you felt respected in the process as a person and as a council.
So the main challenge in Maple Ridge has been a lack of engagement. We are a caring community, but we are a community that wants to be heard. And so throughout, the lack of process in our community has led to a lot of people feeling like they're not heard. And when you don't allow people to engage and be a part of decision making, what starts to happen is a small rumbling, but that rumbling will grow like a snowball that starts out small and rolls down a hill. And that's where Maple Ridge Ridge is we had a rally of citizens, hundreds and hundreds, I think there was over 600 people that came out to say we want to be heard. And it doesn't seem to matter what our citizens do, they just aren't being listened to. And that's really a big piece of what inspired me to run, is that I have a long-term commitment to the citizens, that I have demonstrated over 20 plus years that I listen. And not only do I listen, but I action. I'm engaged in a number of neighborhood groups. I listen to a vast amount of opinions. And that's really what's going to make the difference, I think, in my riding, is people just want to be heard. People from all walks of life and with all different opinions. And I think it is government's responsibility to bring people in, bring stakeholders in, bring partners in, bring all levels of government in when they're making decisions. And those decisions then flourish in a community instead of what we've seen in Maple Ridge, which is quite the opposite.
Great. Now, I'd encourage our viewers again to look at the bottom of their screen, to connect onto slido.com and send in questions, where you see a fleet of questions coming in now. But just before we go to the other questions, I'm going to turn to Cheryl, who works in the Division of Family Practice, dealing with the family doctors in the area, and has a particular window on the health aspects of things. So can you just give us a brief view of the homelessness and addictions issue from the medical perspective?
Yeah, for sure. Just also to touch on the environment that it's created in the community. One of the things that Maple Ridge is definitely known for, Pitt Meadows is known for, is we've always been a compassionate community. The fact that Chelsea references so much volunteerism, and that is because we resonate, that we actually contribute, we actually care about our communities. And I think it really shows how dysfunctional a government is when people are actually taking to the street and they are arguing with each other. We actually got a really bad rap for being like an uncaring community. And that was because we weren't being listened to, and so people were having to come out, and differences were being played out on the street. And the government owns that. They need to make sure that they listen, and they haven't. And how it's impacted just in the healthcare and in the areas of supports for the homeless or addiction, when it is such a disjointed system and there is an inability to refer to or to have the supports there available to the frontline workers, whether it's counselors, doctors, housing supporters. When those full suite of supports are not there, you do get this piecemeal ping pong sort of response to the needs of these people. And so they are left on their own. And definitely the toll that it's taken on the frontline care providers, the families practice clinics, especially with COVID coupled on top of that, it has been an enormous strain and stress on healthcare for sure.
Thanks for that answer. And we're going to go to the next question. I'll just read it off the screen here. My childcare fees have gone up and up recently, and I'm always afraid we'll lose our spots with nothing else out there. Is this a priority for you to fix? This actually came up in today's news conference, and I'm pleased and proud to say that we take the approach that we've got to make it easier for mums and dads to be able to get to work and raise a family. And in this COVID crisis, this has been really amplified and something of great note to many people, because it's being described as a recession that disproportionately affects women. And this is because, whether we like it or not, in our society, when there's a childcare crunch, it's usually the mums who take care of the kids and sacrifice their career. So we're seeing women's earnings declining. We're seeing a dramatic drop of women's participation in the workforce. We've got to deal with this, folks. So we'll be coming out with a very interesting approach to childcare, expanding access, making access much easier to sort out as you're in the application and registration process for daycares, and also the chance to work with the new federal government programs, which are going to make childcare that much more affordable. We will also be talking about making the cost appropriate for income. The NDP like to trot out $10 a day daycare. They have produced 2,000 spaces out of 100,000 in the province. So their approach to it has been basically a sham. It's just a bit of a farce when the NDP talk about affordable childcare. So we'll be doing a much more concerted approach, because this is a priority for our party. Now, the next question, small business like my breakfast joint were struggling before COVID-19 under the NDP. What will you do to help small businesses like mine? And we'll have a package coming out next week that I think will answer some of this question in more substance. But let's go to you, Cheryl. Small business is pretty much integral to Maple Ridge. Absolutely. All along the Lougheed Highway and along 224th. It's kind of the beating heart of the community. You can't drive everywhere for something. So can you talk to us about what you're hearing from small businesses in your area?
Well, absolutely. Before COVID, even before COVID hit, the health tax and a number of other taxes that the NDP had overlaid onto them were already starting to put pressure on them. Maple Ridge and Pitt Meadows has always really had to force themselves, struggled a little bit to try to get people to stay in their own community and shop. A huge percentage of the people who live in Maple Ridge and Pitt Meadows commute out of the community. So already small businesses are having to really market themselves, try to bring back the residents into their own communities. So every day, every dollar counts for small business in Maple Ridge and Pitt Meadows. So with COVID having impacted them and the taxes that the NDP have been putting on them, absolutely we're hearing very, very strong stories from people who own businesses that they need help, that they need a strong economic plan. They need to be able to have the ability that people who are living in their communities have the ability to come and shop local businesses and support what is actually emerging or trying to emerge in Maple Ridge and Pitt Meadows.
Now, Chelsea, our next question is, our homeless camp has been dismantled, but now several more have popped up throughout the Lower Mainland. What's the solution to end this cycle? And I think we've talked about that to a degree. Perhaps you can talk about what your city council experience has taught you of how to move through this issue of homeless camps that pop up. It was a difficult journey in Maple Ridge.
Absolutely. So really a challenging issue, and it really is in combination. What you need is elements of all the different government levels to work together. And I can only speak for myself on council, but we've done a lot of work to address this. So because we weren't getting any support, we had to come up with our own social safety plan. And what we did is we transitioned some of our bylaws officers to actually be going out and connecting with people who are street entrenched and trying to get them support services. Now the problem is that one size doesn't fit all, and as we've been discussing today, having a multi-pronged approach is what Maple Ridge really needs. But we need to have partners at the table that want to work. We do have some solutions that are really working in Maple Ridge, and we feel that our community is unique, and so therefore it needs unique solutions. And it'll be great to have a new government coming forward that is interested in listening to local government. Like I said before, I'm only sitting in this seat because I recognized the need for the different levels of government to work together. And a municipality can be doing as much as it possibly can, but if it doesn't have that connection and that healthy working environment, it's really 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. And that's been my experience. It's been very frustrating to have some things working and then 2 steps back. So our bylaws officers have been connecting with folks that are starting to do these pop-up camps. I'm not going to tell you that they don't exist, but they do. But we're getting on them right away. The challenge is we don't really have enough services to then transition those people so that they can start to have a healthy opportunity to move their lives forward. And if we don't have those solutions, it's just a constant hamster wheel. And that's really what is going on in our community. Like I said, it's making progress and then stepping back. And as a city councillor, there's nothing more frustrated. People believed in me when they voted for me, and it's really disheartening that I have to disappoint them. I believe if we have the BC Liberals at the table, things are going to change in our community.
So the next question we have is apparently from a daycare operator. My daycare has raised fees 2 years straight because of the employer's health tax imposed by the NDP. This makes savings from the other programs net out to 0. Why is this so backwards? And we couldn't agree with you more. You know, I've talked to daycare operators all over the province, particularly a few in Kelowna and in Richmond, and they've said the NDP's programs have made no real difference. The conditions are so onerous that a couple of them actually closed shop completely because they just couldn't make a go of it. The economics weren't there. And that's a crazy thing to hear from a government like the NDP that purport to keep families first and to make daycare more affordable, and then in fact they're driving the operators out of business. So we're going to have quite a different approach, and we think it'll be a much more productive approach than what's been done with the NDP. So the next question we have, as a server, I feel absolutely terrified of a second wave because I will lose most of my income. How can we support bars and restaurants now, not later? And I think I'll do a bit of an intro to this before handing it over to Cheryl and Chelsea. This is critical in our society right now. There's a $6.2 billion tax bill due a week from today. It includes all the provincial sales tax, liquor taxes, carbon taxes, employers' health tax, and there are going to be thousands of small businesses, particularly restaurants, who are just going to throw up their hands and say, can't pay it, it's over. And we have to think, in our society, is that okay? If we have thousands of viable businesses that are just going to disappear, go insolvent, declare bankruptcy, walk away, that could well be the case by Christmas. So we've got to talk about a way to keep those businesses viable, not just restaurants, but the whole tourism sector. Just think if you've gone through this summer in the bear watching business or as a kayak operator, and you're looking forward to a winter in the ski business and there's no revenue. Are all those businesses doomed and should just be written off? Or do they need some way to survive until there's a vaccine, until the tourists come back, until we've got a spring in our step again and can participate in the economy? So I'm going to hand this over to you, Chelsea. You must run into a lot of small business operators in your riding who are saying they're not sure where the future lies. Where are we going?
Definitely, small businesses are struggling. They were struggling before COVID and they continue to struggle. And I would say that a lot of this resonates back again to the challenges that we're having with safety and security. If you don't feel comfortable walking in your downtown core because you're in fear of possibly being harassed or someone stealing from you, then you don't support local business. And that's definitely, we're seeing the impacts of that. Add a layer of concerns over COVID to that, and now you're really in trouble. We definitely have to support our local businesses, but until we have a safety and security plan in place and we're doing some positive things to change people's situations, I don't think that's going to happen. So if we continue down the path in Maple Ridge and Mission where we have an NDP leadership, I don't feel that things are going to get better. We have to have a government that also is concerned about small businesses. And as a small business owner myself with a startup, I recognize that it is really important that government has the buy-in at the table so that we can support small businesses, which are really the key to success in a small community.
So just before we go to the next question, I'll remind people to go to slido.com. The instructions are on the bottom of your screen when you're on Facebook Live. And Cheryl, just before we go to a question about housing and development, can you just give us a bit of an impression of the health adaptations that have happened in small business in Maple Ridge in terms of plexiglass, PPE, all of that stuff? Are you hearing from people that it's become pretty expensive?
Oh, absolutely. Expensive and very competitive, trying to actually get the supplies and get the installs and be able to address, the safety concerns. Restaurants and bars have really, I think, jumped through hoops to try and ensure that the patrons come back, and they've spent a huge amount of money, and I can see their concern with that if they have invested all the monies into the capital changes they had to do to accommodate people feeling safe as they're going out for dinner or having their drink with their friends, and that to find that was all for naught, and now they have to again hit the reset button and be able to, and not be able to have people coming into their restaurants because we've got another wave coming. It absolutely will impact the businesses. We have some long-term restaurants, bars in our community that have established themselves and are hanging in there. And we have a few that are really the go-to places for the younger generation, and that's always been like it. And Chelsea will agree that the 19 to 27-year-old feel it's a no-fun community, and we were just starting to get that momentum, that lift, and then when COVID hit. So it is imperative that we help those bars and those craft breweries stay open and be able to still keep that sense of community, because regardless of what we say about just what we're losing out on, we still look to go back to some of those social nuances that just make us feel like we're still a community. So I absolutely really feel for and worry myself that we start to lose that inherent social fabric of our communities when these businesses are gone due to COVID. So yeah, the health impact and all that they've done is actually, it's costly and it was stressful, and we really have to do something to make sure that it was not for nothing.
So the next question is, the NDP have shown they have given up on public consultation and municipal autonomy about housing projects. How would a BC Liberal government do this differently? And Chelsea, you've lived this for a couple of years, and we've talked about this to a degree already tonight, but I've got to say, from my point of view as leader of this party, that what happened in Maple Ridge and what is going on in places like Victoria is really not acceptable. I was in Victoria yesterday, and a couple of the small business owners there had very strong words for the NDP because there have been 2 motels, 4 in total, that have been converted into housing with no support services whatsoever. So these have turned into kind of chaos zones surrounding these small businesses. And one of the small business owners went so far as to say, between the City of Victoria's attitude and the NDP's approach to it, that they are slowly destroying the City of Victoria. Those are pretty strong words, but they were heartfelt from this person. And I think we've lived through an element of this in Maple Ridge, perhaps not that bad, but certainly that sense of lack of engagement from a government supposed to serve the people. So can we get a handle from you, Chelsea, in terms of the response that's come from the 2 MLAs? The NDP MLAs seem to have been missing in action through all of this distress.
Yeah, that is what the citizens tell me, is there's just been a disconnect. So provincially, we have a government in place that only wants to hear the things they want to hear. They're not interested in hearing opposing views. And I've always believed that you learn more from people who have a different opinion than you do from those in your circle that are on the same page. And unfortunately, that open dialogue and that ability to connect with others that have different ideas, have lived experience, it's just not happening at the table. And like I said before, what it's done is it's just been a snowball effect of frustration. In the housing projects that were put into Maple Ridge without a lack of consultation, there was tokenism consultation. So if you register, if you sign up, you can come to this table with like minds, where we may have one individual at the table with a dissenting opinion. And that's not valued consultation. That's not real engagement. We're going to give you the narrative and we're going to tell you how it is. Where under the BC Liberals previously, I was impressed because I went to an event at a church where we had our leadership sitting on a stage to just listen to citizens. And you would watch people come in and they would be pent up and they would be tight, and then they would express what they needed to express, and you would just watch the body language go down. Well, imagine about 3 years of not being able to say what you need to say. We have a really pent-up community. I think there's a really strong desire for change, and I think there's also a real concern from the community that if we don't have change, we don't know what's coming. I'll be honest, I live in fear about which property is going to be purchased and what is going to go in. And that's a reality that I see from the local government table, is I never know what we're going to be faced with, because that lack of connection and working together for the best for our citizens is completely gone.
Wow, and that's quite something to say, that you've experienced the phenomenon of basically modular housing being dropped onto land bought by the province with no consultation with the neighborhood or with the municipality. That's not good enough.
Can I add also, because Chelsea raised the town hall at the church, and actually I was working for Doug Bing at the time, and my role after that was to collate all of the all the submissions, and over 900 submissions came in from the community that night explaining to the government what they wanted. And it was very clear what they wanted. And I can tell you what the NDP then did with that was the exact opposite of what the people asked for. And yet there was a very solid, very actually reasonable and deliverable direction from the public given that night. And so for me, it was very disheartening to have all that time, all that energy, exactly how Chelsea referenced, just the energy in that room, people coming in angry and feeling like they had contributed to a direction. And it was completely ignored by the 2 MLAs and the NDP when they came into power.
So our next question is one that resonates certainly for me with 3 young 20-ish kids who are entering the workforce now, and I know your kids are probably in the same stage, Cheryl. I'm worried that recent college graduates like me are going to have an impossible time finding a job with COVID. How can we ensure we don't miss out on our careers? And the preamble, of course, is if you happen to go into something to deal with health fields 4 or 5 years ago, you're sitting in a good spot right now. If you went into something dealing with tourism or hospitality, it's pretty scary right now trying to find any kind of job and worried if you're going to have a future. So Cheryl, we share that phenomenon of having kids in their 20s. Tell me about what your experience has been from learning from your kids and what they're going through with their friends.
Yeah, we hear different comments from them. Some are very grateful that they're still in university and they don't have to face it, and they're hoping they're missing it. Others who've just got out of university and are now absolutely not going down the path that they thought they were going to go down. They're looking for just either working with family or just anything that they can get hold of, because they just feel like there's no options out there for them. So I actually, even pre-COVID, it was unsettling for any youth starting out on a career path, because I always found it so frustrating that they graduate and then they look at all the application, it says 5 years experience. And that's sort of that daunting, how do I get experience if I can't even get into the field that I've now gone through education for? So it is really complex for the youth coming out on any given year on how to immerse themselves in the career path that they have. And we have to do everything in our power right now to support that generation, because we don't want to lose them. We always talk about the brain drain, the brain drain of leaving the Lower Mainland due to the costs associated with living here. And so we certainly don't want them also having to be pushed away because just their financial setbacks from not being able to start their career path due to COVID has compounded that. So definitely hearing a lot of young people just looking for a holding pattern. I think parents are going to have them on the couch for a little bit longer than you had hoped, but you just feel so proud when your child actually sets off and has their career path going. And this is very disappointing that there's a lot of families that are going to be delayed in that experience, but we've got to wrap around as a community, as a government, and we have to figure out what is that holding plan to help them get through this so we do not lose them from the Lower Mainland. We need those youth to be our leaders and helping us move forward out of this economic situation.
And I'll ask our inquirer, or the questioner, who's the recent graduate, stick with us for the next 2 weeks. We're going to have some very positive things to say for young people entering the workforce. And we're hoping to put a smile on your face and a bit more optimism into your future. The next question I'm going to give a quick answer to. It's, how will a BC Liberal government lower my taxes? The answer is, let's talk on Monday. We're going to have a pretty exciting announcement that will make a real difference in every person's life in the province of British Columbia. So, the next question, what will you do for our struggling tourism sector? And Chelsea, why don't you just give us a bit of a handle on tourism in Maple Ridge? It's not so much a destination, but there'll be a lot of people in Maple Ridge working in tourism. And do you feel the effects of COVID in Maple Ridge and the community you're in? Do you hear from people that this is a problem? And what kind of solutions are they suggesting and offering?
So Maple Ridge is actually a great place to come and tour. We have amazing parks, we have amazing lakes, we have places you can hike. It's actually, I think, very undiscovered. And so it has been disappointed that in COVID, we haven't been more inviting people to tour within their own town. I think there's a lot of really undiscovered places in both Maple Ridge and Mission that even the locals don't know about. And so in COVID, I think you've got to be innovative, and you have to find ideas when you're working in the tourism sector of how are we going to bring people in. And there definitely has been a lack of that with our current provincial government. And actually the Minister of Tourism works in Cheryl's riding. And that has been a disappointment to me, because when we're talking about local business, if you want to support local business, you have tourists in your own town. And that keeps people safe in COVID times, but it also helps support local business. So what my community is looking for is to drive people to us. We're very undiscovered. We're just in a growth phase where we are building up instead of out, and really exciting times for Maple Ridge and Mission, because we're young cities and we have a lot of growth to do and a lot of responsible growth to do, but we are also entrenched with beautiful mountains and scenery and waterways, and it's just a beautiful community that we have to drive people to come and support.
Great. Now, the next question is pretty specific. I'll probably take it on. It says, our strata fees have gone through the roof due to costly insurance. Will your party do something about this? And a bit of context here, for those of you who haven't paid attention. In the last year, strata condominiums have seen their insurance fees go up anywhere from 40% to one case we heard of in Penticton. They've gone up 11-fold, over 1,000%. And to some people, this is what breaks the bank. They got into an affordable condo, their payments were okay, the strata fees were manageable, and then out of the clear blue sky comes this enormous increase in insurance fees. So we pushed the NDP very hard on this in the spring session of the legislature, again in the summer session. They put through some legislation that basically says, oh, well, you should be told when they're going to go through the roof. That doesn't do anything for the actual cost. It does nothing for the condo owner, for the strata council, because the cost remains the same. All they do is get told it's going to go up 20 days earlier. So we have said, and did it in the legislature, and the NDP pretty much ignored it. I used to work in a law firm that did a lot of work with insurers, and there are different models of insurance. What we have right now in the strata condominium insurance market is we're dealing with the worldwide majors. They have a big hurricane loss in Florida, or they have some big fires in California. Guess who pays for it? The entire client base around the world, including you in Maple Ridge living in a condominium. So we said to the NDP, make it possible to have self-insurance, which is what all the municipalities do. They don't pay insurance fees to brokers who pay them to insurance companies. They get in a pool and spread the risk amongst themselves. So why not allow self-insurance for condominium groups? Why not allow mutual insurers to be set up? Why not allow captive insurers to be set up? And the NDP just ignored all these requests and said, that's okay, people will have to figure it out. On top of that, we said to the NDP, you charge 4.4% tax on insurance throughout the province, including your ICBC fees. When the fees go up by 50 or 100 or 300%, your tax take triples. So let's just be honest with the people of British Columbia. Why don't you cap your insurance tax where it was last year, instead of getting this windfall of tax for the province from this massive increase in insurance fees? Again, complete lack of interest on the part of the NDP. They couldn't care less about this topic. And when you know the answer in terms of what percentage of people in the Lower Mainland live in condominiums, it's over 50%. So this is a pretty core issue that we intend to address in this election. We'll bring up some more details within the next 10 days or so, but we have not forgotten about strata condo owners, and the NDP seem to think that the only people who matter in their world are people who are renters. Let's not forget, half the people in the Lower Mainland live in condos, and we have not forgotten about that. So for those of you still looking for a way to connect, it's on slido.com at the bottom of your screens. And the next question is, we're having an election in the middle of a global pandemic. What is John Horgan thinking? Followed by 3 or 4 question marks. So Cheryl, why don't you take that one on? I think it's a common theme throughout British Columbia. It's a question we hear multiple times every day.
Mm-hmm. You know, I think I probably want to just reflect on my day job with the Division of Family Practice and the pressure that it was put on family practice doctors when COVID hit, and how they were left on their own to figure out, excuse me, and navigate it. Having to shut down their clinics, having to learn virtual technology, figure out how they can safely examine a patient, how they knew that people were putting off their necessary health care in fear of coming into a medical facility and contracting COVID. So when you know that your frontline healthcare workers are absolutely stressed over that, and then you layer on the fact that we're not sure on how the typical flu is going to behave. And then you say to these people, and now we also want to put an election in the middle of this so that everybody has to now be worried about how this forced interaction and concern and distraction from the important work that has to be done to navigate us through this next wave of COVID. So much was reliant on what the government was responding to and providing, and although there had to be a lot of advocacy from the frontline family practice doctors for their needs, there was at least that coming out for understanding and for supporting. But with the distraction of election, it is absolutely incomprehensible how John Horgan would have believed that that was the right thing to do. I just fundamentally believe that a leader, no matter whether you're BC Liberal, NDP, Greens, you put your selfish needs aside and you do what's right for the people. John Horgan is so bent on following the polls that said, you've got this, John, that he does not care about the people. And it sickens me what he's going to do to the frontline workers during this. It's wrong.
So a question that's directed perfectly into your life experience, Chelsea. When it comes to the opioid crisis, what about prevention? How are the Liberals going to help troubled youth so they don't end up addicted and on the street? And you've spent a lot of your life invested in the well-being of youth. We heard from a constituent of yours today. She said there's quite a bit in Maple Ridge for kids, and there's more than enough for adults, but she's worried about youth programming.
So actually, I think in Maple Ridge, we are extraordinarily fortunate to have a one-of-a-kind youth center. And the best thing about the youth center that we have is the programming. And it's all based around the natural high. And it's getting back to basics. It's getting back to volunteering and recreation and all those pieces, finding a leader to mentor you and support you. And in Maple Ridge, we do have a lot to do for kids. But the piece that's really missing, I believe, in the addiction continuum is prevention. There was actually a flyer delivered when my son was in grade 12 suggesting that graduates buddy up with a friend when they would be using narcotics. And he came home and said, I don't know anyone who's using intravenous drugs that goes to my school. So the assumption was made by that flyer that kids are doing drugs. And I personally, as a parent, where I understand education, found that flyer lacked prevention. And if we don't continue to work on prevention, we're just going to find the numbers grow and grow and grow. And we know that addiction always leads back to underlying factors, whether that be trauma or medical factors. And so prevention is key. The youth in Maple Ridge, we have a high demographic of youth, and they are very important. They're very important to me. I've been an advocate for a safe house since, I guess, about 15 years ago. So absolutely, we need to work on prevention, not just with our youth, but with our adults all through their life. And I feel like prevention has just been forgotten, and it's failing.
So the next question is, how would you replace the types of jobs left when Hammond Mill closed? And for those of you who may not be fully aware, the Hammond Mill was on the Fraser River, and was one of more than a dozen mills that closed in the last 15 months because of NDP forest policy. Teal Jones in Surrey, Hammond in Maple Ridge, and then you can go up the Fraser River and run through a dozen towns that are at risk of disappearing altogether because of NDP forest policy. So that's kind of similar in terms of prevention and treatment. The Hammond Mill is probably not reopening. So what we've got to do is recognize that these are very skilled people who are there with a lot of trades qualifications, people who know how to work. And what we've got to do is make it possible for that kind of manufacturing work to exist in a place like Maple Ridge, which is part of the industrial base of Vancouver, based along the Fraser River. There's no need to say these are yesterday's jobs. We need to recognize the skills of these people, respect them, and make it possible to have businesses like Mass Timber, which is happening in Penticton, where these enormous laminate beams are put together, so that you can build the kind of 14-story residence that exists at UBC that's a pioneer. It was the tallest wood frame structure building in the world when it went up about 3 years ago, and now it's being replicated all around the world. That's the kind of business we need to attract to Maple Ridge. That's the kind of business we need to attract throughout British Columbia, and we won't do it with heavy taxation from the NDP and their oppressive approach saying that everything is the fault of management and they're just going to gouge the organization until it goes out of business. The last question we're probably going to be able to cover here, we got 2 minutes left, is I had to wrongly pay the speculation tax because I couldn't rent the apartment my mother left to me after her passing. Will you end the unfair speculation tax? And I don't expect either of you to be right on top of that one, but the NDP's speculation tax is a complete mislabeling of a greedy tax designed to hurt homeowners. They labeled it speculation because they thought it would be popular. They do this all the time. Phony taxes like the additional school tax that does not go to schools. It has nothing to do with schools. We have said about the NDP's speculation tax, we will get rid of their phony speculation tax and bring in a real tax on speculation, which is the flipping of paper contracts for condominiums. That's a capital gains tax. It's not just an asset tax like the NDP's version. So the answer to the inquirer on the screen, we do not believe in the NDP's approach to taxation. It's just an abuse of home ownership, and we will get rid of the NDP's version of the speculation tax and deal with the real speculation, which is on the flipping of paper contracts before the condominiums were even built. So I think we're down to the final wire here. I'm going to offer each of you 30 seconds to give your reflections on where you see this election race going in Maple Ridge. Let's start with you, Chelsea.
Sure. I'm really excited for our community to have a change. It's really motivating and energizing to see my volunteer growing and growing and growing, and people are reaching out who actually would have been typical NDP voters. A lot of workers who work in unions are saying, I always voted for work, but now I have to vote for community. I live in this community and I've seen the destruction happen. And that's exciting to me. I really feel the change, and then I'm actually visualizing the change and seeing people and having all different kinds of people come on my campaign. So I think you're gonna see a change in Maple Ridge and Mission, and I'm gonna be really excited to deliver great services to my community members and engage you like you've never been engaged before.
Yeah, I'm feeling the same momentum. Definitely have people coming forward that says, Cheryl, I've never been involved in politics. I don't even really pay attention to it, but you're running. I'm there to support you. I want to see a change. I just firmly believe that people like myself and the team that Andrew Wilkinson is building, people are saying it really sounds solid. It's what they can relate to. They are listening to what Andrew is saying, and the conversations I'm having with them about what my vision is and how I'd like to represent them. And I think I have a proven track record of listening and actually thinking about the community first and my needs second. And I've always done that, put my family first, put my community first. And it's just a natural evolution to take this role and really deliver on it for the communities of Maple Ridge and Pitt Meadow. So really looking for the excitement, and same thing as Chelsea, the team's growing, and don't anticipate a lot of sleep coming up in the next couple of weeks, but we'll be able to eat more calories, Chelsea, as we are on the campaign trail. So anyways, looking forward to it.
Can I say one more thing? I actually wanted to point out to you, Andrea, you have been really engaged in Maple Ridge and Pitt Meadows, and we've never seen that kind of interaction before. I feel you're really connected to the issues of our community, you're really connected to local government, and I want every citizen that's voting to understand that the next leader of the province actually knows where we are on the map, knows our leadership, and is interested in collaboration, and that's really what excites me, so thank you for that.
Well, thanks, Chelsea. And just to wrap up, we're in the middle of a provincial election that wasn't necessary. John Horgan called it for his own selfish reasons. We can't find anybody who wants this except him. He's now spinning tales about why it was necessary that are simply not true. So this week has been about demonstrating that you cannot trust the past Premier of this province, John Horgan. He's showing himself to be dishonest in many different ways, and we are trying to bring forward a thoughtful, competent, skilled team, including Chelsea and Cheryl, so that we can represent a more positive vision of British Columbia. And let's not be mistaken, we've got a huge challenge on our hands. We've got to get through COVID with the kind of skills that Cheryl and I bring from our respective medical backgrounds. We think we can contribute a lot to making British Columbia a healthier place. Once we get through the epidemic, we've got to think about how to rebuild this place, about how to make it viable and prosperous so that our young graduate can look forward to a good job, so that our tourism industry can survive. Our restaurant operators will say, I will be in business next year. I will not be bankrupt. This is critical to who we are as a people, and our task is to restore confidence and rebuild BC. We hope to do it for you. We hope to do it with you, and thanks for watching tonight.